My golden brother spent thousands to prove I was a failure, but he uncovered my millions instead. I used to think that family bonds were unbreakable, that no matter how much we argued, how different we were, or how much resentment built up over the years, blood was thicker than water. But I was wrong, because sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones secretly waiting for you to fail. And my brother? He was willing to go to insane lengths to make that happen. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. My parents were traditional, strict, and incredibly proud, especially when it came to their firstborn son, Andrew. Andrew was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the star athlete, the straight-A student, the one who, by all accounts, was destined for greatness. Then there was me, the disappointment. I was the kid who didn't fit the mold, quiet, awkward, always lost in books and computers. I wasn't athletic like Andrew. I wasn't loud and confident. And worst of all, I wasn't their version of successful. To them, success meant status, wealth, and admiration. And for most of my life, they acted like I would never amount to anything. Andrew and I had a strained relationship from the start. It wasn't just typical sibling rivalry. He didn't just tease me, he belittled me. Every chance he got, he reminded me that I was less. Mom and Dad feel sorry for you, you know? You'll never be as successful as me. You better pray someone hires you, because there's no way you'll ever make it on your own. And my parents? They never stopped him. Sometimes they even agreed with him. They believed in hard work, discipline, and tradition, and I was nothing like them. So when I struggled through school, when I dropped out of college, when I took a low-paying job at a comic book store, they made it clear. I was the failure of the family. But what they didn't know, what Andrew didn't know, was that I had been building something in silence. And the moment he tried to expose me as a failure was the moment he destroyed himself instead. It all started when I stopped attending family dinners as frequently. Every Sunday night, my parents expected me to make a 2-hour drive just to sit at their table and listen to 3 hours of Andrew bragging about his latest sales commission, his new car, or his kids' sports trophies. For years, I tolerated it. For years, I let them belittle me while pretending it didn't bother me. But after a while, I just stopped showing up. And that's when Andrew started digging. One night, I got a call from my mother. "Your brother is worried about you." I sighed. "Why?" "You've been distant. You don't talk about your job. You never bring a girlfriend around. He thinks maybe you're struggling." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Mom, I'm fine." "Are you?" she asked, voice dripping with concern. "Because Andrew says you're probably living paycheck to paycheck." I rolled my eyes. Because that was classic Andrew. He had to be the one who had it all together, and I had to be the pitiful younger brother. So I told her the truth. "I don't talk about my job because I don't feel the need to prove anything to him." She hesitated. "But you're okay?" I smirked. "I'm better than okay." She didn't push further, but I could feel it. Something was off. And 2 weeks later, I found out exactly what Andrew had done. I was sitting at my desk, working on a new startup project, when I got an email alert. A security notification. Someone had attempted to access my financial records, my bank accounts, my investment portfolios, my business records, my credit report. Instantly, my stomach dropped, because I knew, without a doubt, who was behind it. Andrew. I spent the next hour digging, and what I found made my blood run cold. Andrew hadn't just tried to snoop on me. He had hired a private investigator to follow me, to dig into my finances, my career, my personal life. He was actively trying to prove that I was a failure, that I was struggling, that I was exactly who he had always said I was. But here's the thing. I wasn't struggling, not even close. And when I finally confronted him, I made sure he would never forget it. Andrew had always seen me as a failure, the screw-up of the family, the one who would never make anything of himself. So when he hired a private investigator to dig into my life, he expected to find proof of what he already believed. He wanted to confirm that I was broke, miserable, and struggling to survive. But what he found instead was the truth, and it destroyed him. I spent the entire night reviewing what I found. Andrew had really gone all out, hiring a PI to follow me, gathering financial reports, even contacting old professors from the college I dropped out of. I should have been furious. I should have felt violated. But instead, I just laughed. Because the thing about people like Andrew, they never see past their own ego. He thought he was exposing me as a loser. He had no idea that I had been quietly building something real. And the best part? By the time he realized his mistake, it was already too late. The next morning, I sent him a text. "We need to talk. Meet me at the Blue Oak Cafe at noon." No response. But I knew he'd show up. Because if there was one thing Andrew couldn't resist, it was the chance to rub his success in my face. When I arrived at the cafe, he was already there, sitting at a corner table, looking annoyed as hell. I sat down across from him, took a slow sip of my coffee, and smiled. "So, hard a PI, huh?" His expression didn't even flicker. "You weren't telling anyone what you were up to," he said, crossing his arms. "Mom and Dad were worried." I snorted. "Yeah, I'm sure their concern had nothing to do with you being nosy." He leaned forward, smirking. "Look, I was just looking out for you, okay? And honestly, I'm glad I did, because now I know the truth." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? And what's that?" He smirked, pulling out a printed folder. Of course he did. Andrew was dramatic like that. He slid it across the table, looking so damn smug. "Your credit history. Bank statements. You barely have anything saved, man. Living in a tiny apartment. No college degree. No stable job. What exactly were you planning on doing with your life?" I just stared at him for a second. Because this was perfect. He had no idea. And I was about to enjoy every second of this. I leaned back, giving him a slow smile. "You know, Andrew, I have to admit, I'm impressed. You really went all out, huh?" He smirked. "Someone had to." I nodded, tapping my fingers on the table. "And you're sure you got everything? Every single detail?" His smug grin widened. "Oh yeah, I made sure of it." I chuckled. "Well then, I guess I should tell you something you missed." I reached into my pocket, pulled out my own folder, and slid it across the table. Andrew frowned, flipping it open, and within seconds, the color drained from his face. Because inside was the real truth about me. The business I had started 2 years ago, the one that was now generating 6 figures annually. The investments I had made, the ones that had tripled in value since I started. The apartment I still technically rented, because I had actually bought the entire building under a private LLC. I wasn't just doing fine. I was thriving. And Andrew? He had just publicly exposed himself as a fool. He stared at the papers, flipping through them like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. This isn't possible," he muttered. You don't even have a real job?" I grinned. "Nope. I run my own company. And unlike you, I don't feel the need to scream about it at every family dinner." He looked like he had just been punched in the gut, because in his mind, I had already lost. I was supposed to be the failure, the one he could look down on forever. But now, he was realizing that the only real failure at this table was him. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "You wanted to expose me? Congratulations. You did. But all you proved was that you had no idea who I really was." He clenched his jaw. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" I smirked. "Because it wasn't their business. And it sure as hell wasn't yours." For the first time in his entire life, Andrew was speechless. And damn, did it feel good. But the best part? This wasn't even the worst of what was coming for him. Because what Andrew didn't know was that while he had been digging into my life, I had been looking into his, and the secrets I had found were about to blow his entire world apart. Andrew thought he had one. He thought he had exposed me as a failure. But what he didn't realize was that while he was spending money on private investigators to snoop on me, I had been quietly digging into his life too. And what I found was worse than I ever could have imagined. I didn't go looking for dirt on him at first. I didn't care about Andrew's life. He was the golden child, the one who had everything handed to him. A high-paying corporate job, a big house, a picture-perfect family. But after I found out he had hired a PI on me, I got curious. Because if he was this obsessed with proving I was a failure, then maybe, just maybe, his own life wasn't as perfect as he pretended it was. So I started looking, and within a few days, I found everything. The first crack in his perfect facade was his job. Andrew always bragged about being a high-level executive at some fancy finance firm. And technically, that was true. But what he left out was that his entire position was built on a lie. Turns out, Andrew had padded his resume years ago, adding degrees he never earned, certifications he never completed, and skills he didn't actually have. It was all fake, and somehow, no one had ever bothered to check. Until now. The second red flag? His financial situation. Andrew always acted like he was rich, like he had so much money that he could look down on me forever. But the reality? He was drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out. A mortgage he was barely keeping up with. And, the cherry on top? He had taken out a secret personal loan to cover gambling losses. He wasn't just living above his means. He was one bad month away from losing everything. And the final nail in the coffin was his marriage. Andrew always paraded his perfect family around like a trophy. His wife, Emily, the woman who, according to him, was the best thing that ever happened to him. The kids, the house, the luxury vacations, everything looked flawless from the outside. But behind closed doors, Emily had already filed for divorce. And Andrew? He had no idea. I found out through a court record search. She had hired an attorney months ago, quietly preparing to leave. And judging by the documents I found, she was planning to take everything. The house, the kids, a huge chunk of his assets. And the best part? She had listed infidelity as one of the reasons. Meaning Andrew wasn't just an arrogant fraud. He was also a cheater. I sat back in my chair, staring at everything I had uncovered. And then, I laughed. Because Andrew had spent so much time trying to prove I was a failure. And yet, his entire life was a ticking time bomb. And I was about to light the fuse. The next time I saw him was at a family dinner. And let me tell you, that night was going to be legendary. Andrew had no idea. No idea that I knew everything. No idea that while he was spending money on private investigators to dig into my life, I had been quietly uncovering the cracks in his own. And the best part? He still thought he was winning. That I was the failure, and he was the golden child. But by the time this dinner was over, everyone in our family was going to see the truth. I arrived at my parents' house, keeping my expression calm and neutral. The second I walked in, my mother smiled and patted my arm. "Oh, sweetheart, we're so glad you could make it this time." I bit back a smirk. "Yeah, I bet you are." Because Andrew had probably been feeding them lies about me for weeks. And tonight, he was going to try and show off again. But he had no idea that I had come prepared. Dinner started off like it always did. Andrew dominated the conversation, talking about his big deals, his connections, his perfect life. Meanwhile, my parents nodded along, eating up every word. Then, after about 20 minutes, he turned his attention to me. "So, little brother," he said, smirking, "how's life treating you?" I took a slow sip of my drink. "Can't complain." "Still working that small side job?" He said it like he was trying to sound casual, like he wasn't dying to rub something in my face. I just smiled. "Still running my company, actually." His smirk wavered. My mother tilted her head. "Company?" Andrew let out a short laugh. "Mom, it's barely a company." I leaned forward. "Oh, Andrew, you should know. You did hire someone to dig through my finances, right?" His face froze. And just like that, I had the room's full attention. My dad frowned. "Wait, what?" I kept my eyes on Andrew, watching his expression slowly shift. "Yeah, Dad. Andrew hired a private investigator to follow me, dig into my financial records, and try to prove that I was a failure." Silence. Then my mother gasped. "Andrew, is that true?" Andrew let out a forced laugh, raising his hands. Okay, let's not get dramatic. I was just concerned." I snorted. "Concerned? You wanted to expose me." "All right, fine." He glared. "I just wanted to know what you were really up to." And I was right. "You were just scraping by." "You sure about that?" I interrupted. And then, I pulled out the folder. The same one I had shown him at the cafe. I slid it across the table. "Go ahead, Andrew. Read it out loud." He grabbed it, flipped it open, and the moment his eyes scanned the first page, his face went pale. My mother reached for the folder, flipping through the papers. Her mouth dropped open. Wait, this says your business made 6 figures last year. My dad frowned. And you own an apartment building? I smirked. Yup. They turned to Andrew, who looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. And then I leaned forward, lowering my voice just enough for the room to go silent. You know what's funny, Andrew? You were so obsessed with proving I was a failure that you didn't stop to think about your own life. His jaw clenched. What the hell is that supposed to mean? I smiled. It means I did some digging of my own. His entire body tensed. And that's when I started listing everything. You lied on your resume to get your job. My father's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? Your executive title is built on fake credentials. Andrew gritted his teeth. You're drowning in debt. I continued. Maxed out credit cards. A personal loan to cover your gambling losses. And your luxury lifestyle? It's all fake. My mother gasped. Andrew, is that true? His face twitched. But I wasn't done. Because then, I hit him with the final blow. Oh, and your wife? She filed for divorce months ago. And you had no idea? Silence. Complete, stunned silence. Then, what? Andrew's chair scraped back as he stood up so fast it nearly tipped over. You're lying. I shrugged. You can call her and find out. He was seething. His hands clenched into fists. And for the first time in my life, I saw genuine panic in his eyes. Because suddenly, his perfect world was crumbling. And he had no one to blame but himself. My father looked furious. My mother had her hand over her mouth. And Andrew? He was fuming. But before he could even think of turning this around on me, I stood up. I think we're done here. And with that, I walked out, leaving Andrew to face the mess he created. I walked out of that dinner feeling lighter than ever. For years, Andrew had built himself up as the golden child, the one who had it all, the one who was better than me in every way. But now, everyone in that room had seen the truth. And the best part? I didn't even have to lie or exaggerate. Andrew's own actions had destroyed him, and the fallout was going to be spectacular. By the next morning, the entire family knew. I woke up to missed calls from my mom, a few texts from extended relatives, and, most amusingly, absolute silence from Andrew. He was humiliated, and for a guy like him, that was worse than anything. Later that day, I got a text from our cousin, Jake. Jake, bro, what the hell happened at dinner last night? I smirked and replied, Andrew happened. Jake, dude, he's losing it. I heard he stormed out and mom had to calm your parents down. Dad says they're furious. I leaned back in my chair, grinning, because of course they were. For years, my parents had put everything into Andrew. They had praised him, defended him, enabled him. And now, they were realizing that their perfect son was a fraud. And me, the one they always looked down on, was actually the successful one. I could only imagine how much that was hurting them inside. Then, a few days later, I got a text from Andrew's wife, Emily. I hadn't spoken to her much over the years. She had always been polite, but Andrew kept her at a distance from me, probably afraid she'd realize I wasn't the loser he made me out to be. But now, she had nothing to lose. Emily, I heard you exposed Andrew. I just wanted to say thank you. I raised an eyebrow. Didn't think you'd be happy about it. Emily, I've been waiting for karma to hit him for years. He thought he was untouchable. You finally proved he wasn't. I chuckled. So the divorce is final? Emily, almost. I just need him to sign the last papers. But after last night, I don't think he'll fight it anymore. That was music to my ears. Andrew had lost his career, his reputation, and now his marriage. And all of it was because of his own ego. But the best part? I wasn't even done yet. Because while Andrew was licking his wounds, I had one final move left. A way to make sure he never tried to come after me again. And when I was finished, there would be no coming back from it. Andrew had lost everything. His career, his reputation, his marriage, all gone. But if there was one thing I knew about my brother, he wasn't the type to go down quietly. And I wasn't about to let him crawl back and try to take me down with him. So before he could even think about making a comeback, I made my final move. And it was devastating. A few days after the family dinner disaster, I got a text from my dad. Dad, come over. We need to talk. I stared at the message for a second. I knew exactly what this was about, so I replied, Me, is this about Andrew? Dad, just come over. I thought about ignoring it, but then I realized this was my chance to finish what Andrew had started. He had tried to ruin me. Now, I was about to bury him for good. When I arrived at my parents' house, I could feel the tension in the air. My mom was sitting on the couch, her hands folded in her lap, looking like she had been crying. My dad stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, his face set in a deep frown. And Andrew? He was sitting at the dining table, eyes dark, jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. Sit, my dad said. I took a seat across from Andrew, keeping my expression calm. I wasn't here to argue. I was here to win. This has gone far enough, my dad started. You two are brothers. This feud needs to end. I chuckled. Feud? Dad, this isn't a feud. Andrew literally hired a PI to try and destroy my life. Andrew scoffed. Oh, give me a break. I was just proving a point. I raised an eyebrow. And what point was that? That you're a lying fraud who can't even keep his own life together? His eyes flashed with anger. You smug little. Enough. My mom suddenly snapped. I just want this family to be whole again. I sighed, shaking my head. Mom, there is no whole. There never was. You and Dad spent years enabling Andrew, treating him like he was some kind of golden child while acting like I was worthless. She flinched, but didn't argue. I turned back to Andrew. And you? You couldn't stand the idea of me succeeding. You wanted me to fail so badly that you literally paid someone to prove it. Silence. Then, in a low voice, Andrew muttered, You humiliated me. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. No, Andrew. You humiliated yourself. You built your entire life on lies. And now that they've caught up to you, you're looking for someone to blame. His nostrils flared. I should have never trusted you. I laughed. You didn't trust me, Andrew. You underestimated me. And that was your biggest mistake? My dad sighed, rubbing his temples. So that's it? You two are just going to hate each other forever? I smirked. Oh, I don't hate Andrew. I just don't care about him anymore. Andrew tensed, like that hurt him more than anything else I had said. Because for him, I had always been the shadow, the one who looked up to him, the one who always came second. But now, I wasn't chasing his approval anymore. And that hurt him. I stood up. I think we're done here. Andrew glared at me. You think you've won? I smirked. Oh, I know I have. Then I turned to my parents. I don't need this family anymore. And after everything you've let happen, you don't deserve me in it. And with that, I walked out. For good. Later that night, I got one final message from Andrew. Andrew, you'll regret this. I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I replied. Me, no, I won't. But you will. Then I blocked his number. Because Andrew, he wasn't my problem anymore. And that was the best revenge of all. Andrew thought I would regret cutting him off. That I would miss our family, feel guilty, maybe even come crawling back. But the truth? I had never felt freer. And Andrew? He was the one falling apart. A month passed. Then two. And in that time, Andrew's entire world crumbled. His wife officially left him, taking the kids and a big chunk of his assets. His company finally figured out he had lied on his resume, and Andrew thought I would regret cutting him off. That I would miss our family, feel guilty, maybe even come crawling back. But the truth? I had never felt freer. And Andrew? He was the one falling apart. A month passed. Then two. And in that time, Andrew's entire world crumbled. His wife officially left him, taking the kids and a big chunk of his assets. His company finally figured out he had lied on his resume, and he got fired. And, because of his massive debts, he had to sell his house. He went from being the golden child to nothing. I only found out because our cousin Jake called me one night, sounding almost giddy. Dude, you will not believe what just happened. I smirked. Andrew lost the house? Jake snorted. Worse. He had to move back in with your parents. I actually burst out laughing. Because Andrew, the guy who used to mock me for struggling, who acted like he was above everyone else, was now living in his childhood bedroom, broke and alone. Poetic justice. My parents, of course, were miserable about it. They had worshipped Andrew. He was supposed to be their success story. And now, they were stuck with him. I got a text from my mom not long after. "Mom, I know things have been tense, but maybe it's time we put this all behind us?" I stared at the message for a long moment. Then, I laughed. Because now that Andrew was down, they suddenly wanted to reconnect with me? Yeah, not happening. I sent a simple reply. "Me, wish you all the best. But I've moved on." Then, I blocked her number too. Because the truth was, I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to